Okay, all best behaviour now. The recording has begun. So, Chris, I'm going to do the introduction if you nod. Yes, I'm going to do the introduction. Excellent. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. This event, Chris from the Justice and Peace Commission has booked myself and Anna to come along and share with you. So Anna is a theologian with a very great love of Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker movement. And I work for the Columban Missionaries as their Justice and Peace Coordinator, with a lot of work, particularly in education. At the time we were booking this thing and organising it, we had no idea if we would be into the election cycle, the bit before the election, the PERDA it's apparently called, or if it would be some future distant thing, and we now know that it still hasn't happened. But we think that the things that we're going to share tonight, both an input from Anna and myself, but also the kind of sharing between the group, will kind of set us up, and there's stuff to do in this period as we prepare for an election. So we hope we find it all useful. I am very aware that there's so many people in this Zoom group tonight that have expertise and knowledge to share themselves. So we will do our best to share some things maybe that you've heard, some things that you haven't, and we will invite you all to contribute in different ways at different times. We're going to begin with a prayer, and Anna is going to make a PowerPoint up here, please. She's looking like she's doing it. It's going to appear any minute.
Gonna find where it's gone, Jim.
We're slick and practice. This is professionals in action. So the prayer that we're going to use comes from Father Kevin McDonough. So Kevin is a Columban who has just returned from Peru, and I was with him the other night, and he's back because he feels absolutely passionately about climate change, and he feels like it is the issue that we should be working on. And he wrote this prayer with that in mind. So I thought we might use this to begin. And I think just for the sake of it, for the joy of it, I think we will all unmute and say the prayer together. So could I invite everybody to mute themselves? We say together in the name of the Father, and of the Son,
and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Eternal God,
Lord of creation,
as we look
towards the upcoming elections,
Spirit of our
ask that your spirit of truth be upon us.
let us, your people, be guided by
Gospel values,
Love
love of neighbour, truth, justice, and compassion towards all, particularly the least of our sisters and brothers. Help us to choose political parties and candidates willing to place the needs of the many before the profits of the few, to put the well-being of the majority above the well-being of the markets, and the conserving of our common home ahead of the cosseting of corporations that harm creation. Amen.
And I invite you to find your mute button again, if you could. And if we could move on to the next screen, please, Anna. I didn't want that to be the end of our prayer. I thought it was important that we kind of took a moment to, well, there's two possible phrasings here. One is to listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And the other is to think about, Janet, please, can you mute the echo? Thank you. To listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, or to listen to the joys, the hopes, the griefs, the anxieties of the men and women, I like this translation, of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted, because they are the joys and the hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. So we're reminded again and again, and I'm sure Anna will go into it in greater depth, that the election isn't about us in a kind of individual way, or us in the people who are close to us. It's about the common good. It's about being aware of the kind of broader issues. So what we're going to try and do now is in a moment of kind of prayerful contemplation to say, well, what are those issues? What are those concerns that we bring this evening? What are those concerns that we bring as we enter into an election cycle? And I'd invite you all to type them into the chat. What's hopefully going to happen is, as you type them in, I will be dropping them into a word cloud. And eventually, once I've got it ready and I give Anna the wink, I will share the word cloud on screen, and we'll just have a moment looking at what it is that we're bringing, what our concerns, what our priorities, our issues are this evening, and as we come into this time. So could I invite everybody, please, into the chat? And if you can't find the chat, let me write the word here in it. See if I can do that. Yeah. Hopefully you should see a flashing thing, and if you click on that, the chat will appear. And into that, please could you write the issues, concerns, priorities that you are bringing into this election cycle. Thank you, Jane. I think what I'm learning here is I can't keep up with you all. You're bringing so many different concerns. You know what? I'm giving up on the word cloud. I think we're gonna look through the chat ourselves. So if you once you've written your thing, could you make an effort to scroll back in the chat, and you'll see a way of scrolling back up through it on the right hand side, and just read what other people are bringing to the table tonight, what they're concerned about, what their worries are. Anna, maybe you could choose some of them and read them out.
I think there's quite a lot of people saying they're concerned about the climate crisis and sort of biodiversity. It's also kind of an emphasis on how Jane's put it, treating everyone equal. And also kind of part of that seems to be things like sharing wealth evenly, redistribution of wealth, helping the poorest, homelessness as well. Violence, so that's youth violence and knife crime, peace more generally, care for the vulnerable. What are some of the other themes that have come up? Some more. Say that again, sorry, James.
I find it very encouraging to see the way that we're kind of, as Laudato says, Laudato Si says, we're kind of linking the together. It's recognizing that these things are connected.
Yeah. I think also things to do with sort of the seamless garment, so assisted dying, food poverty, housing, so sort of more structural economic issues, poverty and inequality. Yeah.
Ray is a Columban, so I have to read out his by contract. Populism and fake news all the time, doing stuff around refugees. And when you ask kids and teachers, I've got to say, what percentage of the world's refugees do you think come to Britain? It's almost always, I'm given 50, 60, 70%. less than 1%. But the kind of the stories that are out there convincing people are so powerful. Overseas aid. Right, Anna, I think we'll continue. Thank you all for your contributions there. Keep them in mind, and we will come back to them as things progress. So I thought we would just use this last bit of that prayer again. Maybe if I do the first bit and you do the second bit, Anna, rather than unleashing everybody again. Eternal God, Lord of creation, as we look towards the coming elections, we ask that your spirit of truth be upon us.
Let us, your people, be guided by gospel values of love of neighbour, truth, justice and compassion towards all, particularly the least of our sisters and brothers.
We ask for God's blessing this evening as we gather and reflect together. Bless us as we share and help us to hear your call. Amen.
Amen.
So I think I hand over to you, Anna.
Okay, so I'm just going to sort of do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of CST and democracy, and what CST has to say on sort of political participation. And we'll have a bit of time to talk about some of the quotes from Catholic social teaching in groups and think about this a bit more. So the first thing to start off with is just a very brief statement that historically the church had a bit of a complex relationship with democracy. And this is really because it was quite suspicious of liberal movements. So, for example, the French Revolution, really due to things like anti-clericalism, separation of church and state, and freedom of worship. As the church's role started to change, with the loss of the papal states, etc., and it's linked to the state kind of changed as well, and it became more, I suppose, amiable towards democracy. And this is really kind of starts with the beginning of Catholic social teaching in Rerum Novarum. We find some human rights language there, but it becomes more and more obvious and moves closer towards democratic and liberal principles throughout the 20th century, really until by the end of the 20th century, the church is really championing democracy as the best form of government. And the reason it does this is for several reasons. So in the 1960s, we see with Vatican II and John Paul XXIII, a real kind of turning point. And the rights language is used much more strongly in those documents. There's also the freedom of worship is accepted as well. And it starts to really champion these kind of human rights and sees the democratic form of government is most in keeping with the nature of the human person. And it's for several reasons. So it allows for political participation, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is very, very important within Catholic social teaching. And it also protects the person against totalitarianism, so from the state intruding too much in their lives. So it's sort of guarding against the extremes of state control. The idea of democracy is still kind of qualified within Catholic social teaching. So you'll find in the documents that they say they support democracy. They don't necessarily say it's the only system or that there might not be alternatives, but they say it's the best one that we have as long as it promotes human dignity and human rights. It upholds the common good, and it also allows for political participation. And this idea of political participation is very important within CST because, like I was saying about the role of the state, it protects against totalitarianism, but it also allows people, which in language that Catholic social teaching uses quite a lot, to flourish. So to participate in society, to form relationships with other people, and have control over what's going on in their lives. And this happens on lots of different levels. So it's about building up a healthy civil society. So the family is the first unit there, but also all of these groups that go in between the individual and the state. So schools, hospitals, unions, etc. And that's really how Catholic social teaching sees society as working in a healthy way for allowing these kinds of groups. So that's why political participation is so encouraged. Also within Catholic social teaching, the understanding of the human person is that they're social, they're naturally built for relationships, so they should be allowed to associate, but they're also naturally political, so they should have a say over what's happening within their lives. Within the sort of views of democracy and how this works in practice, Catholic social teaching places quite a lot of importance on moral laws, such as the common good, and it warns against democracy without moral values that can become kind of relativist. And the common good is really important here because it presupposes that there's an objective, shared, common truth, but also a common good that can be used to guide democratic society and that can be found by working together. And the common good also goes beyond majority, so it doesn't necessarily align quite precisely with democracy in the sense that it isn't just about how the majority benefits, but really it's about the attainment of the good for each member of society. But it's also not a sum of these individual goods either, but it's how we can attain goods communally. Also within the common good, there's a wider claim being made for communal justice here. So this is things like the option for the poor and the marginalised. So again, it isn't just to do with the rule of the majority, but it's how everyone can benefit within society together. And really this is what guides decision making and political participation. So this shouldn't be judged on individual or elite interests, but really should be thinking about what would be the common good of society, what's the health of society as a whole, and importantly, linking up with the option for the poor, how would those at the bottom of society benefit? So when we're thinking about judging a policy, this is what we should be thinking about. How's this going to affect people at the bottom of society? So it kind of differs again from things like GDP, economic markers, and it's more to do with how every single person is doing and judging it at the lowest levels of society rather than the richest at the top. So I'm just going to pause there. I know it's a very sort of brief introduction, but I just want us to take a bit of time to go through some quotes together and think about this a little bit on our own. So I'll pop this link in the chat, and this will take you to a couple of different quotes. Get into breakout rooms and discuss these in our groups. There are 6 quotes on here. I think maybe, James, how many people have we got?
We are 17.
We've got 17. Okay. So maybe if we do you think 4 or 5 groups? Yeah. So I think if we maybe if we each have a look at one of these quotes, and they've on the sheet they say group 1, group 2, etc. So check which group you're in, and then pick the quote that corresponds to that one. And we'll maybe go into the rooms for about 10 minutes. James and I will come around and just check how people are getting on. And then if you could just prepare to feedback a little bit about your quote and share with the group, and then we can discuss some of these ideas that come out of this, come out of these quotes to do with political participation.
So Janet, is that okay?
I'm not going to.
I think that's everyone back, Anna.
Excellent. Okay, so I think if we just go around the rooms and if people maybe just give us a quick summary of what they were, just briefly what their quote was about and what they were discussing. So should we start with group one?
Well, I'm happy to talk for group one since I did more talking. So I think we got the quote about you should be involved in politics. And there's an argument that, I'm not going to get involved in politics from one person. There's an argument for me, yes, I'm going to get involved in politics and actively plotting at the moment about candidates and what they believe in. And then we had a discussion about Coventry and what Coventry councillors fail to do and their attitudes to people that they're employing. The conclusion was they want the Coventry Council needs shaking up, but I doubt if they have been. But we decided that people said, well, are we really going to get involved in politics? And I think probably we agreed, just about agreed, the default was you should listen to the arguments and vote.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would go a lot further, but that's because I'm an activist.
Yeah, and I guess there's a couple of, I think, interesting things that you said there, Adrian. Thank you for giving us your summary. I suppose part of it is also what do we think politics is? Because I think sometimes we think of it as a narrow vision of MPs and Parliament, but it can also be much wider. If we're thinking about politics as just to do with how we organise society and how we live together, everyone can be part of that, but in lots of different ways. And again, like you're saying, there's a spectrum that can go from voting to activism and kind of everything in between.
So can I give you the example of how it works? I mean, I've been involved a couple of years ago when the Baroness Meacher bill for assisted dying was coming into the Lords. And as I'm a doctor, a group of doctors opposed to it, we had an email and writing campaign to the Lords. And we do think it made a difference because she really was intent on getting a bill through, which was going to say to Parliament, to the government, that you must bring in an assisted dying bill within the next year. And it actually never went to a vote. And there's no doubt our emails and writings did influence peers. Some of them were very pro. There's no doubt that people pro-assisted dying have influenced the argument on that by simply writing in their droves with their stories to MPs. So that MPs like the MP for Sutton Coldfield, Andrew, the Conservative MP there, he's changed his position. So many people have changed his position, and so many people are sitting on the fence because they're worried that if they don't sit on the fence, then they might lose votes. And again, there's two parties which have got, relevant to this discussion, two parties which are pro-assisted dying in the manifestos, which are the Greens and the Liberal Democrats. So you do have a choice there. If you want to vote for assisted dying, vote for a Green or a Liberal Democrat.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. I think that's quite a lot of good examples about alternative ways of getting involved, and kind of, I suppose, the people power of actually just writing can be pretty effective, actually, without having to necessarily go and glue yourself to something on the street. So yeah, and we'll talk about sort of ideas of ways we can get involved in a little bit. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. How about group two?
Yeah, as was support for democracy. And I mean, one of the things that we all agreed was that it's quite right and proper for the Christian community and the Catholic community to be engaged with democracy and to put our views forward. The issue that struck me was that looking at the turnout at Blackpool last week, when only 32% of those turned out to vote, is how do we, as an informed group, 17 of us, engage with the rest of our parish community and convince them that they need to be involved and engaged. They need to influence whatever politician they want to vote for, whatever party that is, but they need to be aware of what the policies are and its link into the into our faith and what we want society to be in. And I think our biggest challenge is how do we engage other people to actually put that forward at hustings and to whoever the candidates for the general election are going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of I suppose, I guess, political apathy more generally, but also just sort of disempowerment, isn't there, of people feeling whoever I vote for, it doesn't really matter, or
Yes.
just or feeling too isolated. Yeah. But I mean, I think if you look at, well, I guess the West Midlands, the elections for mayor were a pretty good example of every vote counting, weren't they? Because that was maybe that was between like 2,000 votes, wasn't it? So that was a pretty powerful example of how it can work.
Can I just say, Anna, somebody said that if one more Tory had put a vote in every ballot box across the West Midlands, it's just an incredible statistic. Andrew Street would have got in with one more vote in each ballot box.
Yeah, I read that earlier.
Amazing.
It's quite crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's real democracy, isn't it?
Yeah.
That shows how important your vote is.
Exactly.
And get out there and vote.
Yeah. And I think we'll talk about this a little bit more when we think about sort of ways of getting engaged. But I think absolutely, and I think it's, I suppose, in terms of relating it to our faith life, one of the real strengths that we do have is Catholic social teaching, which places such an emphasis on it. And I suppose it's figuring out ways that we can communicate this and why it is important. And again, I think, at least for me, I think it does come back to these ideas of politics isn't just about voting for some people in Westminster who seem really far away. It's to do with our daily lives and how we live, and it really affects everything, really. And trying to broaden that definition for lots of people. James, have you got any sort of thoughts that you wanted to? Because I know we've spoken about this a lot in various meetings recently.
I've been writing down various things at the moment.
Can I add something, please?
I think I'll let go.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I was just going to say how the question about getting people engaged. CAFOD and the SVP have just launched their campaign, which is based absolutely the idea of getting a group in a parish and then trying to get all the parishioners in. It's already started that way, and I think we should put a full weight behind all of that.
Thank you, Phil.
We'll come back to that later, Phil.
Yeah.
I was going to say that this idea of kind of multiple ways of engaging in politics. One thing that I find myself talking about a lot is the concept of the repertoire of engagement. That, particularly in Catholic schools, and I think probably true of Catholic parishes, that we're so good at charity.
Yes.
But often it stops at charity. And the kind of trick of showing people that there are many different ways that they can actually respond to injustice, that they can respond to need, to show them to develop a toolkit. And it's so important in kids, because if you don't develop it when you're very young, you don't realize that letter that Adrian mentioned had power, or organizing a group, as Phil mentioned, has power. Like there are so many different ways to engage, and unless we have that repertoire, in terms of Bob's question, I think the yes but how, I think is a screaming. We're all screaming the same question. My answers to that, kind of coming back from my research years ago, I sort of decided there were three barriers. One was I don't know about it. One was I don't care about it, and the third one is I don't believe I can make a difference. And I think the kind of apathy or the chosen ignorance, all of these things, these kind of non-engagements are some multiplication, some combination of those three. So there's kind of traditional awareness raising. Here is the issue, and that speaks to that I don't know about it. That I don't care about it is that I think the hardest one. It's the kind of empathetic thing. It's what's this got to do with me? What's this got to do with people I care about? What's this got to do with future generations? But it's kind of knocking out that thing that says, well, this has got nothing to do with me. And then that last bit, which is the problem I'm seeing in my conversations with young adults and young people most, is the sense that, well, I care about it. I know about it. I just can't do anything. So it's giving people real examples of how they can make a difference, kind of showing them what is possible. And often that needs to be through encounter and through story and through kind of witness. That's my rant for now. You carry on with your breakout groups and I'll jump in a bit.
Let's jump to group 3.
As I've got my voice back, I'll do some feedback. But one figure that came from the CAFOD session on Saturday was there is an estimate of 8 million people who are eligible to vote who are not registered. And helping people to get on the register will be something we could do. We had authentic democracy, which was a very long thing to read out because a couple of people couldn't see it very well. But so I read through it, and it's talking a lot about truth. It says that those who are convinced they know the truth and adhere to it are unreliable from a democratic point of view because they're not willing to change. Truth does change during our lives, how we're taught, and things move on and we're taught something different. But there are absolute truths, which we as Christians have, certainly. And it ends up saying, history demonstrates that a democracy without values easily turns into open or thinly disguised totalitarianism. We have so many examples of that in recent years. We've got Trump, we've got Putin, we've got Netanyahu at the moment. There is madness in the world. But if a leader of a country can convince his or her people that their truth is absolute, that country is going to believe it. And elections will be swayed because of it. And countries will go to war. If for evil to succeed, it takes good people to do nothing, which is what we've got to use to persuade people to become involved in what we do. Anyone else from group 3 got something to add?
Thanks, Chris. No, that's fine.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That was some very powerful thoughts. Yeah, I think again, as a couple of things you were saying, this idea of we need some kind of objective truth to guide what we're doing, but also the idea that some things do shape and shift. And I think Francis talks about that quite well when he talks about encounter and dialogue. And sometimes to reach these ideas, we need this dialogue to come to these sort of mutual understandings. And perhaps sometimes that's kind of missing. I'll just feedback from group 4 because I've got our little summary here. So we were thinking about the role of government. I think probably most of our discussion was about really how our government isn't doing the things that are described in this quote. So talking about things that we need sort of more of a bottom-up approach rather than kind of top-down. We need politicians that are honest and transparent, also politicians that actually listen to the people and they represent the people rather than their party. So this kind of dual idea of politicians perhaps being sort of following their own ambitions and their own interests, but then also not necessarily following their consciences always and following the sort of party line. Also this idea there's quite a lot of scapegoating that goes on in politics rather than kind of positive action. Emphasis on sort of grassroots actions. So again, looking at Pope Francis quotes on the climate, it needs to be kind of bottom up. The other bit that we thought was quite interesting here is this idea of social humility. And this is what really should be governing politicians. And I don't know if we always see that or the listening. And also the idea that politicians are quite often distanced or removed from their constituencies. And perhaps don't necessarily engage with people and listen to them. So again, these ideas of dialogue and encounter. Is there anything else that anyone would like to feed back, or any quotes, sort of any sort of ideas about the quotes that we've looked up?
Should we move on to the next bit then, Anna?
Yeah.
Do you mind bringing the PowerPoint back?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we now move to kind of, I suppose, from theory to action, but I think it's fair to say it's been entwined already. To this question, well, how can we actually practically do this stuff? And I came up with 6 thoughts just to share with you before we look at some of the resources, including the one that Phil mentioned a moment ago, which I put into a word art just to prove that I could actually do it, because it failed dismally in my last effort. Here. So here are 6 words, kind of put many times, and Anna and I will take one each and just kind of move through it. So how can we practically engage? So one of the words I wanted to start with was, I'll need to make sure I don't do one that Anna's going to do, collaboratively. Collaboratively. So Ray, who you can see the top of his head there, was a missionary in the Philippines. There's another missionary in the Philippines, a guy called Brian Gore, who is a bit of a Columban legend. And he told me once about going around to visit different communities, little basic Christian communities, across the island of the Philippines, or the Negros that he was working on. And he would use a brush, traditional kind of brush made from many strands. And he would go up to someone and say, well, can you break one strand? And they would break it, absolutely no problem. Can you break 2 strands? And yes, you can break 2 strands. Can you break the whole thing? No chance. When I started working in schools here for the Columbans, I tried a similar thing with paper. So getting kids to, rip a bit of paper, was that easy enough? Yes. Fold it over. Can you rip it now? Yes. Fold it, fold it, fold it, and it gets stronger and stronger to the point where eventually they can't rip it. Apart from one very cheeky 6th former once, who then put the whole bit of paper in his mouth, chewed it for a couple of seconds, looking at me, and eventually took it out and ripped it and said, "Oh, it still works," which was hilarious, but destroyed my point. I think we know we're stronger when we're together. We know that collaboration is a good idea, but I think we so often get caught up in brand or single issue, or maybe local at the cost of national. Or I think one of the ways that we can do this and that we can have an impact is to do so collaboratively. And that means within the church, but it also means without. It means on the issue that you care about, looking for those collaborations with others of all faiths and none. I always think all faith and nuns, which is very confusing. All faith and nuns, to kind of work out, well, who can I work with to spread this message, to have influence on this. Yeah, so my first word there is collaboration. Anna, one from you.
Thanks, James. So I'm going to go to, I suppose, strategically, because that probably follows on quite nicely from collaboration. So I think this is the idea that we can't necessarily win everything. So picking out what are the most important issues, what are the ones that we can maybe achieve something on, thinking sort of within our capacities, what can we do? And I think also, probably just to echo a little bit of what you were saying, not trying to double our efforts and working together, again, is strategic. And I think sometimes there's lots of groups doing similar things and we kind of repeat, but that's not really working strategically necessarily, of trying to use our power together.
My next word is openly. And I think this has been picked up in the quotes you've shared with us, Anna. Being open to the possibility of change, being open to hearing the Spirit move, to maybe letting go of one thing to move to another thing, to willing to have encounters which are real, where we are willing to listen and meet and be moved by. Very recently, I took a group of young adults to Calais. You'll probably, many of you will know the prayer, Lord, bless me with discomfort. Well, this was, I think, the 4th group of people I've taken to Calais for this kind of learning experience and a little bit of volunteering, but mostly to kind of bring people back. And my God, did that prayer work for me this time? That blessed me with discomfort. I came back challenged and moved, and prayer works. And maybe that's where you're going next, the prayerfully, but to be open as we approach this stuff, to not go in with all the answers, to have our passions, to have our priorities, but to be open to the Spirit as we do so. Hannah.
So I think let's move on to hopefully. So that's something that I've been thinking about quite a lot recently. So we had a visit from Martha Hennessy, who's Dorothy Day's granddaughter, but is also a pretty prominent peace activist in her own right. And she came over to the University of Glasgow to talk to the students and was sort of sharing about her activism. And a lot of people asked her, what kind of keeps you going when you're doing these actions where you know you're going to be arrested and you're going to be imprisoned? And she said, it's hope. Hope is key. Hope goes before everything else. And I think there's 2 points that are important within this. So the first is, if you don't have hope, you just give up because you think, you know, we're never going to change anything. We're not going to achieve anything. And it just, without hope, we can't move forward. Hope is kind of key for any kind of action. But also from a Christian point of view, the story doesn't end with the crucifixion. We have the resurrection. So we are inherently hopeful. We know that there is this happy ending. There's this kind of better world, the kingdom of God. And I think when we think about that within our actions, it's really key to keep in mind of how we can move forward, and we live in the resurrection light.
So linking to that, I hope you can see all these things are linked together. The last bit for me on this is prayerfully. And I think I'm speaking to many of you who've had this experience. I'm sure that sometimes it's prayer that leads to action, and sometimes it's action that leads to prayer. And sometimes it's the social justice issues of the cry of the earth, the cry of the poor that kind of brings me running back to God. And sometimes it's my life with prayer that brings me to those issues. So there's a really messy and complex relationship between the two things, that I think is core, that I think that we must keep going back to, that we must give ourselves the space to reflect, and to recognize that we can't do it all, and bring it before God. Let that be some of the collaboration as well. For those of you that are involved with refugee stuff, like this last week has been one of the most difficult weeks. The stuff since Rwanda, the impact on the mental health of so many people, even those who have got no chance of ever being sent to Rwanda, even people I know who've been given their papers already, that are through the asylum system and out the other side, are screaming with fear at the moment. Yeah, and coming back to prayer is just crucial to have that space to kind of stop and process and bring it before God and say, help, and this hurts, and to lament and to call for change. So the words from me, I had openly, prayerfully, and collaboratively, and I think there's one word left for you, Anna.
So last one is imaginatively. This is really sort of thinking about what ways can we engage creatively, whether that's sort of I suppose not thinking outside of just voting, but there are other ways that we can do this. So you see sort of activism through art. That can be a really powerful way to transfer messages. Another one that came to mind, not that I'm necessarily suggesting that we do this, but Saul Alinsky is a good example of thinking imaginatively. When he was organising against Kodak, he had an African American community and got them to all eat beans, and then took them to a symphony hall where obvious disruptions happened, and that was his sort of protest. So I suppose just thinking outside the box, what can we do? And I think that will probably lead in quite nicely to what we're going to talk about next, James, of thinking about these practical ideas.
The imagination, there's some lovely websites full of kind of that repertoire of action I've talked about, kind of different ways that people have made change over the years. The most fun one I've seen recently, we were involved in a school that was upset about some of the treatment of asylum seekers, and in particular, some of you will remember when a government minister got the cartoons of Elsa and Anna and Mickey Mouse painted over because they were too welcoming, and the school decided they didn't like this and sent that MP a big parcel full of cartoons that they'd drawn. which I just thought was a lovely action, and especially when it was picked up by the media. A kind of really gentle but challenging way of saying, you know, hang on, there's possibility of change here. Okay, we're going to move to some kind of resources. We are aware there are so many resources out there, and in the spirit of collaboration and strategic thinking and all of the things that have been mentioned, I'm hoping you can now see my screen. Can someone nod? Yes, Phil, thank you. So we have a number of things we're going to show you, and I'm afraid I do work for the Columban. I'm going to start with showing you the Columban one. So we have a magazine called Vocation for Justice, and on the Columban website you can download it, or we can send it to you, and it looks like this time. And on the front cover, we have purposely used the SVP/CAFOD working together information about preparing for the election. And then in the editorial, and I do not like writing, I like talking. I'm afraid that when Anna was talking about hot air a minute ago, she was probably pointing at me. In the editorial, I've been forced to write. What we've done is we've said, well, we think there's lots of stuff in this particular edition for Vocation for Justice that is useful to share with others. And we've been lucky enough to secure some funding in order to promote, to send and print more of these things. So the idea is that this copy of Vocation for Justice, you can go to, this is a QR code, I don't really understand it, but people in my office say this will do it. Or there's a website, columbans.co.uk/election, which will bring you to this page. And on this page, you can click and get, is that the right page? Maybe it is. Request extra copies, here it is. Where you can go on and you can say where you are, how many extra copies would you like to receive? If you want more than 10, just email me and I can sort that out. And where do you intend to use them? That's basically to stop my mum saying I'm going to give them to my son. So you go on there and you say, well, I'd like to give one to my parish priest, or I'd like to give one to teachers in the school, or I'd like to stand up at church and announce that this exists and be ready to have 20 to give out afterwards, or wherever you think best to use it. And I'll just show you some of the articles that are in there, because we've tried to think quite hard about what could be useful. So there's a couple setting out the theory, including one from Jane, who's on screen somewhere there, which Phil Mayland says is very good. So well done, Jane. And if we go down, this one, I'm hoping that we can get lots of justice and peace people across the country to hand to their parish priest, circle and kind of enthusiastically say, hey, we could do something like this. So this is Father Rob, and he's written a thing which is basically around how might a parish priest preach the election? How might they get across some of these things that Anna's been bringing up in Catholic social teaching? And it's fantastic. It's a really good article. So the hope is that you could put that in front of your parish priest and encourage them. Then we've got lots of practical things. So these come from the CAFOD resources, plus a couple of bits we've added in. It's things about how to organise a hustings, questions that you might ask. And my hope is that people will have copies of Vocation for Justice by their door, so that if a canvasser knocks on the door, they can say, well, I've got a couple of questions for you, actually. And they can raise some of this stuff. I'm not suggesting you raise all of it. You need to work out what are your key issues. What are the things that you want to raise? But these are the ones that CAFOD, SVP, and then we've added some peace ones from the Columban perspective. So all of that is in there. We're also trying very hard to highlight other people's stuff. And we'll come to some of that in a minute. We don't think this is the moment for any one brand to be saying, you know, here we are, the Columbans, or here we are, somebody else. We need to have a collaborative, strategic approach. There's Anna's article, which you've just heard a presented version of. This one I'm very excited about, and I would love to think that this might be something that you could get copies and hand them to the Catholic first-time voters that you know. So this is by Hannah, who is this year's volunteer. There she is. And it's her saying, well, as a young person, as a person coming to my first time to vote, here's the things I care about, which I think could lead very easily from that into a conversation of, well, what is it that you care about it? And this could also be done with those who aren't old enough to vote. So if you have grandchildren, nephews, nieces, people that you know that you could use this to initiate that conversation and say, what are your issues, so that you are going more informed into the election, so you understand what it is that they're interested in. But also, hopefully, they'll flick through the rest of the magazine and hear some of this stuff. And then the other big interest for the Columbians is around interfaith. We call it interreligious dialogue, and we're often talking about a dialogue of life and action, finding issues that we care about and that other people care about, and moving together on those. So we wanted to make sure that was in here, and in particular on this one, we've brought Shannon's article around care for creation and a kind of interfaith approach on that. So that's Vocation for Justice, and there's loads in it. And it's an old-fashioned resource. Like, we are still presenting a paper magazine, but you could also copy and paste from here. We want this stuff to be shared and used. I'm just going to talk through, and Anna, if you want to jump in on some of them as well, a number of other resources, and maybe when I get to the CAFOD one, Phil, or was it Kathleen? Sorry, I've forgotten your name. If one of you, Catherine, sorry, if one of you would like to jump in and talk about that, I'd be very happy. So the Centre for Catholic Social Thought and Practice are trying very hard to get people working together, and we've been very happy to work with them on that. And in particular, what they're doing at the moment is they've got just a holding page here at the moment, but they're trying to create a speakers list. So their aim is to have a list of people willing to give inputs on Zoom or in person around a number of Catholic social teaching related issues before the election, so that you could call upon them and invite them to your parish, to your group, to your wherever. They're also hoping to have a space that will highlight resources, including resources that they'll make themselves, but everybody else's resources too. And it's been so encouraging to see the emails that have come out from this group already, not sticking to their stuff. I saw in the last one they were promoting the CAFOD Zoom before on the election materials. I think that's the approach we have to have. We have to be big and collaborative at the moment. We have to not promote just our own thing, and I think even, dare I say it, non-Catholic things. I think now is the time to kind of collaborate and work together. One more thing from me, and then I'll see if Anna wants to say something. The NJPN, their upcoming conference is themed on just politics. It's looking absolutely fantastic. John Battle is going to be chairing lots of it, and his knowledge on Catholic social teaching and his passion, it will set us all on fire. I'm doing a workshop at it in which we're going to have messages from the margins. I've got 4 Columban people around the world who are gathering together voices from people they work with, to say, well, here are the things we care about. If we're going to say we care about the common good, then let's make sure we hear from other perspectives. So the Just and Peace Conference, I would strongly recommend. Anna, do you want to jump onto that one? Or do you want me to jump to one of the other later ones?
Yeah, do you want to just go through those ones? So this one, this is just quite a useful resource about political works of mercy. So often we think about the works of mercy as charity. This is trying to think about how we can put these into practice in democracy. So it just gives us a couple of ideas to think about. So some of these are voting. I think some of them are sort of organising, things like this. So sort of practical ideas. I don't know if you just want to scroll down, James. And there's so seeking common ground, how to respect our opponents without sort of polarisation, being informed when we participate, volunteering for political campaigns, how to participate in local government, taxes is one thing, and then sort of the care for creation is another. So just sort of building on this.
Don't try and read all this now, everybody. All of this stuff, this is the beginnings of a set of resources, and we're going to invite you to
we'll send this
resources in a minute as well. And all of that, we're hoping that Janet will then be able to put onto the resource website, so that we've got all this stuff. Another one for you, Anna. Do you want to talk about that one?
This is an article thinking again about alternative ways. Adrian, you might be pretty keen on this one. So it's building on some of the things that Pope Francis has said in Laudato Si and Laudato Deum, about lobbying and activism as ways to get involved, and actually why it's quite important within Catholicism. So giving that sort of Catholic grounding for these kinds of actions.
Yeah. Could I invite Phil or Catherine to say something about this?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, James. Yes, so as mentioned, CAFOD and the SVP have jointly come up with these resources under the title of A Year of Encounter, really to encourage Catholics as parishes and as individuals to engage with candidates in the general election. So the booklet which the picture is taken from, that's on the front of the booklet, but inside the booklet, which I'll put a link in the chat if anyone wants to have a look at the resources online, and you can actually order the booklet if you'd like a hard copy. You can order that from the CAFOD or the SVP websites. But what we've done is to focus on 8 areas which are within the mandate of CAFOD and the SVP and are important to the Catholic community. So obviously based on our mandate, so focused on both national and international poverty, food systems, climate, refugees. And within those 8 areas, what we're asking parishes to do, if possible, if a group of parishioners want to get together and decide on up to 3 of those areas that are important to them as a parish. And then in the booklet, there are suggested questions which people can then be prepared to ask of the candidates. It's not party political, so it is to ask the same questions of all candidates, with the idea being that if a lot of people, when candidates are knocking on doors, or when there is a hustings, or potentially people are writing or emailing their MP or the candidates, that they will be getting the same questions, areas of interest again and again, so that they realise that these are important issues in this community. So that's the idea behind it. And as I say, there's lots of information online. You can order the booklet. So I know for myself, it's really helpful to have suggested questions to ask, because it's quite hard to know if you just get a knock on the door and you're in the middle of making the tea or mowing the lawn or something, and you want to ask the questions. So you can have that there. Then you've got those questions there that you can ask them. But yeah, that's the summary anyway. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Phil, because I know that you've
sorry, Catherine.
Sorry.
We're going to run out of time.
Sorry.
I'm so grateful for your sharing of it. Let's just race on to a couple of other things I wanted to highlight. Okay. There's going to be a big nature moment on the 22nd of June, and many organisations are involved in this one. And I'm hoping that lots of people will be marching in London on the 22nd of June. Related to that, Green Christian have just produced a beautiful new election set. Some really good stuff in there. Within the kind of refugee world, the stuff that I was looking at and particularly impressed with was Asylum Matters. Where's that gone? Here it is, the Asylum Matters General Election Resources. So there are many, and I think if we don't stop here, we'll be doing this for the rest of the evening. But what I would invite everyone to do is to share these things in the chat now, if you've got them, if you've seen a resource that you think is brilliant that other people should have, or to email Janet, so that Janet has a kind of massive menu of stuff that we can use to help engage others. Anna, would you mind bringing up the PowerPoint again? And that's the image I wanted. So one exercise I often do with young people is I have a set of juggling balls, and on these juggling balls are each juggling ball has an issue written on it. So the one says kind of, I don't know, access to mental health support. Another says refugees. Another says peace and conflict. Another one says poverty at home, and so on. And what I do is I get the kids in small groups to try and juggle them. And obviously what happens is eventually they drop them. And the point I'm trying to make is that we can't do all of these things. So the next step, I think, in all of this is discernment. I think there's a serious risk I've overwhelmed you with the number of resources already. I think the challenge is to discern which is the juggling ball, the one or two that you're going to keep in the air, which is the thing that we are called to, which is the thing that we particularly feel angry about or moved by, or the thing that makes your heart beat faster, you know, to find that thing which is yours, that is you being called to. And this might not be the same thing for the rest of your life. It might not even be the same thing for the rest of the election cycle. But to focus a little bit, because if you don't, you burn yourselves out. And I'm sure we all know people who've put so much in that they've come out kind of husks of themselves, or been too tired to do the big thing that they were actually wanting to do. So to work out the kind of discernment thing, to say, all right, well, what is it that I feel called to do? And then, Anna, on the next slide, I think one of my colleagues is Mauricio de Silva. He's our interreligious dialogue coordinator. And when you get him talking about mission, it is the most inspirational thing. And the thing he said so many times to me, and I find so helpful, is that it isn't the mission of James, it isn't the mission of Phil or of Chris or of Bob, that it's the mission of God, and that we all contribute to that. We are called to play our part, absolutely. There is a vocational call in this, and we have to do something. But we can't do it all, and thank God we don't have to. That we are part of the mission of God, and it is bigger than us. And I find that so encouraging and so freeing, because I think it allows you to do the bit that you are called to well, without feeling the weight of having to juggle all the balls, to pick all the issues, to pick every fight, to stand up for every injustice going. I think that we are invited to play our part within the mission of God. Okay, we are into the last 12 minutes of our time together. Anna, would you like to lead us into the making a pledge?
So what we thought we could do just for the last couple of minutes is, now that we've sort of thought a little bit about some of the issues, what's important to us, ways that we might engage, we're just going to go back into breakout rooms and think about what might we do individually, what can we pledge that we'll do ourselves, then what would we like to do with others, whether that's part of your group or part of your church, and what support do you think would be helpful to help you move forward with pledges to make. So I think what do you think, James, if we go into breakout rooms for sort of 8 minutes, 10 minutes and feedback?
Yeah, I think let's finish together. So maybe 5 minutes in the breakout and then a little bit more time as a plenary.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Janet, please, would you work your magic?
The MacDonald. I'd like to know and verify that, because I'd like to quote that, but I can't. If I don't know where he's got this, what source he's used. I don't know.
James, can I say you haven't quoted the? Let me see. I've pulled it up so
Hang
I
on,
can
we're in the
remember
big
it.
group now. I have to.
I know, but I wanted to talk about the thing that my friend Richard's doing, the nature and what's it called?
Nature 2030.
Yes, I think that's something that we could get involved in as well.
Nature 2030.
Right, Anna, it's supposed to be you chairing, but do you mind if I put in my advert from Steph before I forget, because we have only.
Absolutely.
So
You're very good, Anna.
I've mentioned already that I've been outside the Home Office. The Home Office reporting centre for the West Midlands is in Solihull. It is right next to the kind of Waitrose, Aldi, Touchwood kind of space. And my friend Steph, who is a trustee, is the project worker for Stories of Hope and Home and works for Birch, has been organising to give asylum seekers who are on their way into the reporting centre, where many are being detained, a little piece of paper that has phone numbers for legal support on. Because what's happening is when people go in, they're having their phones confiscated. We are looking for volunteers who might have time during the day. Really, it's kind of 9 till 11, 11 till 1, 1 till 3. By 3, all the reporting is finished. We think it's probably for kind of 2-3 weeks. So to sign up for a slot or a couple of slots, there's a spreadsheet. If this is something that you feel that you could do, to kind of to be part of a continuous presence outside that Home Office space, which is smiling, is friendly, is in opposition, but is not a protest. It is more very practical. We want you to make sure you've got these legal phone numbers on you in case you are detained and in case your phone is taken off you. I would be very grateful if you could get in touch with me and I can put you in touch with the organisers. So I will put my email in the chat in case anyone is interested or knows anyone else that might be up for that. It's a kind of perversely quite a nice thing to do. You're kind of outside, lots of people beep and wave and are supportive as they come past. And a lot of the people who are reporting are very friendly and very pleased to see you. But it is a very sad time and a worrying time for people. So if anyone would like to take action in that way, please do get in touch with me. And I've left you with like 1 minute to wrap up the meeting.
Thank you, James. I think probably just in terms of time, maybe I'll just invite people to share rather than going around every group. So would anyone like to share any individual actions that they want to pledge?
I'll come back in. Something I just shared. One of the things I wanted to make clear, that when we are working in our own parishes with our own parishioners, we're part of a constituency. So we should be working with neighbouring parishes together who are in the same constituency. So make sure they're on board as well, and you do things together.
Great idea, yeah. But how you can build those networks. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else wanted to share anything that they'd sort of thought of that they would work towards?
So have you got any brilliant ideas about getting ethnic people involved? We're all white on the night, aren't we? And I was telling the story of sitting in between at a medical meeting recently that I was there last, a little bit late to the dinner, and I sat between two Carolyns, one of whom I probably knew was probably going to be a Catholic, but I'd never really talked to him about it. And the other one who was definitely a Catholic, and possibly, and the one to my left again, another one who's quite prominent, is a Catholic but keeps quiet.
I would like to respond. We don't have much time, but it is something that I have done some research into, and it is something that CAFOD are currently putting some money into, engaging with the West African diaspora. There is thinking going on out there. It is limited, and it is often finding barriers, not solutions. But I think it's such an important question, and yes, I absolutely, I'm trying myself in the parish.
I think the West African diaspora is the one to go after, because we've got some very prominent, very articulate doctors of Nigerian origins, often spend most of their lives here, but they're very articulate and very devoted to the cause.
Please feel free to email me, Adrian, if you want to continue a conversation about that. I don't have the answers, but I am exploring that.
Yeah.
I'm conscious we are at time, and we promised that we would finish on time. So although people have been invited to share, I suppose optional continuation. Let's say that. I suggest we finish the meeting officially, and then if anyone would like to stay on and share other thoughts for a couple of minutes, we'd be very, very happy to do so. So shall we finish with the Glory Be together? Oh, Chris, I think I'm supposed to have to hand over to you to wrap things up. I didn't let you have your voice at the beginning. Maybe we should do it now. Chris.
You can do the closing prayer, James, that's fine. But yes, I've got a few words to say. Right. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was
Free
in the beginning.
is
Is now.
now,
Now
and
and
never
ever
shall be,
World
world
without
without
end.
end. Amen.
I want to thank James and Anna for everything they've shared tonight. It's been a very interesting session. It's been so much information to take in. It's great that we have got booklets from a number of organisations. We've got website links, and we've just got to try and absorb this and then do the most important thing, and that is share it. The one thing that will potentially cause us problems with talking to candidates and the hustings is when the election gets announced. I was looking at some dates earlier. The latest date the general election can be, because of when the last one was, is the 28th of January. Effectively, that becomes the 25th because that's the last Thursday. So the election has to be announced this year, no later than December the 12th. There's 5 weeks between the announcement and the election. I don't think they're going to be stupid enough to do it across Christmas and the New Year, but who knows with this government. Whenever something happens, we've got 5 weeks. We may know before that who people are lining up to be their candidates, but we've got to get hold of them quickly. I think that's the only other thing I wanted to add, because when the chat resumed generally there, I heard somebody mention food banks in Liverpool. In Coventry, there were no food banks before the Tories came in. And by 2012, we had 16 food banks in the city and a food bank warehouse that's just had its 12th anniversary. It ships out a ton of food per day across the 16 food banks. This is a city of 300,000, 320,000. Liverpool is way bigger. It's going to be typical of all cities. So food banks is a desperate thing. So there are some hard facts around, whoever it was asking for it. Right. Well, we go on to the informal bit. Please feel free to stay.
Thank you all, and I hope we haven't overwhelmed you. And I think what I want to say most of all is thank you for all you're doing and to encourage you in what you're doing. Yeah,
I'd just like to echo that. Thank you, James. And I think one of the nicest bits about this is getting to talk to people, and that I find that really inspiring, hearing what people are doing, and I think that keeps you moving forward.
Thank you very much. It's
Thank
been
you.
really good. Been really good evening.
Thank you.